Hello, and thanks for joining us on the podcast that discusses all things gaming. Coming to you from the home of Gen Con and the gaming capital of the world, this is The Established Facts.
Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome you to a very special Established Facts. We are live at the Westin Hotel at Gen Con, Indianapolis, and I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, starting with my left.
This is Jeremy, also known as Rygar.
This is Big Don.
This is Josh.
This is Anton.
This is Dr. Deb.
Hey guys, this is Derek.
And Derek, am I right that you are actually with us and we are not Skyping you over a cell phone?
That's what you want them to believe.
That's excellent. And we have a very special guest. We will let him introduce himself because I cannot do him justice.
I can't do me justice either. I'm Tracy Hickman. Yay! And there was much rejoicing.
Indeed. And the bard breaks into song.
Yes, I'm new. I'm New York Times bestselling author, international bestselling author. I have designed role-playing games as long as there have been role-playing games, pretty much, and am trying to be a pioneer, actually, in publishing these days.
Do you have your own podcast?
I did have my own podcast.
Oh, I see.
I did
You
have
beat
my
us
own
on that,
podcast. Yeah. Go on, you can look it up, the Dragonheart podcast, and there was a time when it was live. And I'm hoping to actually get back to that as soon as I can get my schedule cleared, because I really enjoy doing them. Podcast is a great medium.
Yes, it is.
It's awesome.
Or storytelling, as a matter of fact.
Storytelling.
Speaking of storytelling,
That's an excellent segue. Here on
that was the most forced segue.
That was like Play-Doh through that little thing. You squish everything out.
But see, the nice thing about that segue is it was unexpected.
It was. It was. The versus topic we're going to talk about here on the Established Facts. We're going to do canned storyline versus open world storyline, or it's kind of boiled down to: are you pulling your storyline from a module, or are you letting your GM kind of create the story as the story progresses? So,
Sorry, Mike. I was just making sure it was actually on.
It's whatever. So we're just going to go around the table, guys and girl. So, do you prefer canned storyline, or do you prefer the open freeform version of storylines?
Oh gosh, that's pretty tough. I know we smite fence sitters, so I'm going to say open story.
I think I'll go with open story as well.
Oh, so you're going to make me go before Tracy. That's
Hey,
fine.
saving the best for last.
Okay, got it. But I thought my wife was best. That's what it was last time.
No, she's the girl.
Oh, sorry.
She's a token girl.
I'm going to have to go with custom storylines as well.
Same here, custom storylines.
And Dr. Deb.
You gonna be the odd man out, or a woman in this case?
She is.
Well, I am, but beside that point, no. I'm just laughing because so far we are 100%, and that never happens. So
I blame Tracy.
I'd like to do that as well.
We're intimidated.
They'll smite us.
He's the inventor of the smite.
But in all honesty, I do prefer custom storylines.
Custom storylines.
And I will have to agree with the panel. Custom storylines.
I completely disagree with that.
I'm not surprised.
Excellent. Only if they're your king storylines.
Yeah,
I just figured we needed to introduce something else.
This is the versus topic where it's completely one-sided.
I can
The versus topic is that everybody's agreed so far.
I can gladly play the devil's advocate if you'd like.
Well, actually, I think this is it's come down to me, and in fact, I'm going to take the third option.
This does not happen. This is a first in Established Facts history. Please.
Exciting.
What is the third option?
The third option is a combination of both. And there's a very good reason, I believe, anyway, for that. If I will make my argument here, my case for the third option here.
Okay.
William Goldman says that story is structure, and I believe that's true. I also believe that story is meaning, but that's an entire other seminar that will take an hour and a half to give. The concept of story as is structure is an important one because very often if you have an open-ended storyline or if you have an open dialogue in terms of story, it has no structure and it loses its cohesiveness very quickly. It loses the actual heart of story, which has to do with meaning and thrust of understanding into meaning. That requires structure. But at the same time, when you're dealing in a role-playing environment or a game environment, or for that matter, when you're writing a novel, if you hold too hard to the structure, if you hang on too hard to that adventure module as it was written, for example, or you hold on too tightly to an outline for a book as you have written it, for example, then you're squeezing the structure too hard, and in fact you're forcing story at that point. So what I actually recommend, both in our writing seminars online and also in terms of game design, and it's an analogy actually that we put in a game book that I wrote called XDM, Extreme Dungeon Mastery. And this option actually is to view the story as holding a handful of marbles. If you're trying to hold a handful of marbles and you just open your hand and be free, little marbles, and go whither you will, the marbles do exactly that. They wander off, they fall out of your hand, and yes, you lose your marbles. If you, on the other hand, if you squeeze these marbles too tightly, if you try to hang on to them too tightly and ball your hand into a fist, you're trying to force those marbles into that framework. And when you do that, you start seeing marbles shoot out of your hand, and yes, you lose your marbles once again. So the way you hold a handful of marbles is you hold a form. You hold your hand into a loose, rigid shape, where the marbles can naturally settle within the structure of your hand. And that way you can hang on to the marbles. It is a more natural way, it's a more organic way of allowing the story to progress. So this is actually, I think, a third way of looking at story in terms of game design. The game design, I believe, and module design needs to give you a form, give you a structure into which your characters can naturally settle and can move about and make decisions and interact in an organic and natural way. You don't have to force them into story, into specific plot lines and into specific actions, for example, in order to move the plot forward. The motivation is already there in terms of the form and the structure that surrounds it. I guess that's a very long-winded explanation of saying that you need to provide structure in the structure of the story in the game module or the game adventure, but at the same time allow for the freedom of organic freedom and interaction of the characters within that. I think one of the problems that we have in terms of a versus issue in this particular issue is that people think it needs to be either or. Game masters and adventure game players think either you need to, let me be free and do whatever I want to do and go wherever I wish to go and explore the world and dance through the meadow. And while that's a lovely vision, it's not story. At the same time, you have those people who don't understand, who need to control it so tightly that you end up with linear structures in the game, and it's, here I am the dungeon master, let me hold your nose and drag you through the dungeon. That also is not satisfactory experience, and while it may it may be the shadowy form of story, it doesn't present the full broad spectrum of story, which a more organic structure will give.
It reminds me of Derek's game that he runs at Gen Con every year. It has a path that he wants it to go, but it really is a game that we have many times in the past gone off hard right out the door. So we've done that many times, Tim.
And I usually turn one of them into a huge teddy bear, but
Well,
But
I'm sorry. It's true. You can't push them in the direction that you want them to go.
My challenge that I've had is determining how much freedom to give the players as far as what they want to do.
When you do that, it's not a question of how much freedom. I think you give them all the freedom. From the standpoint that if you give them enough rope, they will hang themselves.
Oh yeah.
Having run Killer Breakfast every Saturday morning for 30 years, I can tell you that even a moderate amount of rope is sufficient.
Oh yeah.
The problem isn't freedom for the players. The problem is consequence within the game.
Okay.
We talk about this to a certain extent also in our XDM book, which everyone should read.
I agree.
I own it.
So do I.
Doesn't mean I've read it, but I own it.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's half the battle. But that's see what we talk about in that we talk about the thief player, and we give one example. And the one case study is the thief player who goes into the town and he says, "Where's the richest part of the town?" And everybody says, "Well, obviously it's that street there that's got like the gold plating on the doors and stuff like that. That's the richest part." So the thief goes into the rich part of the town. He finds the biggest house. He picks the lock. He goes inside. He finds the treasure. He finds 10 quadrillion gold pieces, and he drags it out of the house. And he's made a successful roll. That is the most boring story I think I've ever told.
Not a story.
It's not. No, because it has no conflict.
Yeah.
It has no consequence. If you have a thief player, however, who goes into the richest part of town and starts asking about wealthy people in the area, and the constables pick him up and throw him in the oubliette, that makes more sense in terms of the rules of the setting. He comes out, he sneaks into the rich part of town, he breaks into the house, the butler is there, he may be blind and stupid, but he's not deaf, raises the alarm. The guy's trying to take out the 10 quadrillion gold pieces. It really is too heavy for him to carry. And the constable comes and chases him out. He ducks down into the sewer, stays down there for 4 months, hiding out, gets diseases, is sickly, drags himself out of the sewer, and the constables are waiting for him. They saw where he went. The idea of consequence in story, or consequence in setting, goes a long way toward dealing with the idea of freedom. Yes, you can do anything that you want inside the game, as long as you understand that there are consequences for everything that you do inside the game. And I think that's not only important in terms of the joy of play, because frankly, if I really want to play a thief character, what's the challenge in that if I'm not daring the rules? So
I wouldn't want to, and I know I have run it, but I wouldn't want to run for the thief or the warrior or the magic user. I want to run for Josh. That's the character. Ultimately, I would like to see a character arc go from this is where he started, and then see a change in the character, see an emotional attachment.
Well, part of that I think is an understanding of story. And there's a theory of story called Dramatica theory of story. You can look it up online at, oddly enough, Dramatica.com. And they have a software program that they can sell you and that sort of thing. But it's the theory really that's interesting. There are, in fact, in every story under the Dramatica theory, there are actually 4 through lines of story. The first through line of story is, and I didn't mean to leap into this, but the first through line of story is the objective story. It's the story as seen from the outside. It's looking down from above on the events as an impartial observer of the events that are going on. Then you have the second through line of the story, and this is the main character's through line of the story, and this is through whose eyes we are actually seeing these events and his personal journey through this story. Then you have an impact character in the story, and this is a character in the story that is not necessarily a buddy, okay, but it's the person who has the most influence on the main character in the story. So, and then there's the fourth through line here, and the fourth through line here is the subjective story, and the subjective story is the emotional heart of the story. The subjective story, the subjective through line, is actually the story that takes place between the main character and the impact character. It's their conflict between each other that runs through this story, and this is where the emotional heart of the story is. Story is most satisfactory then when the objective and the subjective stories both reach their crisis at the same point in time, because there's a collision of the personal interest and the overall interests that are going on. If we were talking about Lord of the Rings in the broadest sense, because there are actually 5 separate stories in the Lord of the Rings, and we won't get into that now.
Oh.
Sorry. That's another 3-hour podcast.
We're here all week.
But if you look at the Lord of the Rings, the objective story here, the overall above and from the outside story is the War of the Ring. It's Sauron versus the free people of the West.
Right.
If you're looking at the main characters here, the main character in the broadest sense is Frodo, and Frodo is the hero character. He's the main character, right? And so and it's through his eyes that we see the story, the objective story, and we understand the story. Interestingly enough, the impact character here in the broadest strokes of the story is Sméagol, Gollum. Mm-hmm. Because he is the character who most impacts the journey of Frodo. And both of them have their own separate journeys, although they are run in parallel. And so then you have the emotional story between them, the subjective story between them, which is the temptation of the ring, and are they going to endure and conquer this ring? And of course, Frodo fails completely. And it is actually only the influence of the impact character who has succumbed to the ring that the objective story results in a triumph. And then, but the subjective story is a failure because Frodo fails. And that's why the story has such emotional impact for us. Mm-hmm. So what is lacking very often in terms of games in general, and role-playing games in particular, is that we concentrate on the objective story, the setting.
So like the completing of a task.
Exactly, completing of a task, something you can see from the outside, something that's measurable, right? Something that's area-oriented, perhaps.
You have to stop this bad guy.
The big bad dragon.
Yeah, the big bad dragon. But what we fail to do in role-playing games is connect with the subjective story. We fail to connect with with any main character, or in the case of each of our stories of our characters, we are the main character of that story. Right. But we fail to provide an impact character on that journey within the context of the game, and therefore we fail to provide an emotional context and an emotional connection within the structure of the game. This is something computer games have utterly failed to do. This is something role-playing games have failed to do. They simply do not have the ability, nor have they structured this in any way, to give you that emotional through line, to give you that subjective story. And it's something that you have to generate in many ways, I think, yourself. We had a game that I was invited to several Gen Cons back ago, actually. It was run by Peter Adkison, who owned Gen Con. And he invited myself to this game. Margaret Weiss was in this game. Ed Greenwood was in this game. Troy Denning was in this game. It was all the power players come to play. And
I didn't watch that.
I'm jealous.
And while we were there, and the story was that we were elves who had gone to war, and we came back from the war, and when we came back to our ancestral lands, and we were like a big deal here, and had our own mansion here. The mansion had actually been taken over by a local warlord and been given to somebody else, actually, as payment for his services, and we've been thrown out of our home, essentially. Anyway, we came into the tavern. I mean, where else do you go?
Every good story.
Yeah, well, see, that's the Campbellian monomyth, actually. The Campbellian monomyth says that every adventure begins at home, and for us, I guess that's the tavern.
So are we saying that the major amount of parties are just a bunch of lushes?
Pretty much,
Okay,
yeah.
right,
Actually, for our XDM game, we created a game called Quest for the Tavern, which starts with you hanging by chains over a pit with a dragon in it, is your attempt to get out of that and back to the tavern. It's kind of a backwards adventure, actually.
Clever.
So anyway, we're in this game and we're sitting down in this tavern and we came into the tavern. Our characters walked into the tavern, and I sat down in this tavern, and the barkeeper came over. The innkeeper came over to us and said, "Well, what can I get you, Joan?" And I looked up at him. I folded my arms. I looked up at him, and I said, "You remember us, don't you?" And he said, "Well, DM said, I'm not sure." I said, "Oh, sure you do. Okay, quit kidding around. You remember the last time we were in here? What happened?" And I can remember Peter looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And he says, I think so." Oh, I said, "Sure you do. Remember, you nearly threw us out here. There's that big fight that took place, and that woman who was in the bar?" "Yeah." And so this was a way of inspiring this subjective story. By assuming that there is a subjective story that's going on here, it actually allows other players to come in and provide that story as well.
It's a lot like it goes along the same fundamental lines of improvisational comedy. It's the yes and, yes, but.
Yes, exactly.
A game we recently have been playing, or at his house, is a game called Fiasco. And it's very much that style of you're playing off each other and the dynamics and generating those types of story.
It's funny you mentioned that because that whole game is based off everything he just said.
Yeah.
This idea of relationships and trying to create a backstory based off your relationship with the people next to you. And I guess I never really. I remember you guys were just talking a little bit ago, the game we played where you guys were brothers. And I remember that clearly. You had developed that story as the game was going on. Others of us had developed relationships with NPC families, and I can see that more and more. I guess I didn't realize how important it was.
And even some of the best sessions that we had were built around that emotional struggle of our characters having to deal with the reality of what they were getting ready to do. I think we've probably talked about it 2 or 3 times in different episodes, but one of the coolest things that we ever experienced, we talked about it on the character death episode, was we were faced with the fact that our mortality was at hand. We were getting ready to prepare for what we thought was going to be this big final battle between us and the big baddie, basically, and we decided, the GM, who is great at being able to take whatever you want to do and just run with it. She said, "Okay, you've got 2 or 3 days before this final battle to prepare. What are you going to do?" And we all said, "We want to go see our families." And out of that, we just built this really, really cool session of role play. It probably lasted 6 to 8 hours. Mm-hmm. I mean, just in general, and it was great. By the end of the story, or by the end of the session, she was crying. We were crying. We were all just really into it. And then the final battle happened. But that kind of reminds me of I felt like one of the most successful games I ever ran was actually the first game my wife had played in. And I had dabbled around in a couple modules just to get the party set up and things like that, which is actually why when we were talking about the Versus topic, this game came into mind, and that's why I had to pick Custom World, because I was running the Red Hand of Doom module for 3.5, D&D 3.5, and I could tell it's a really hardcore combat-oriented game, and a lot of people were starting to get it was kind of getting drug out, and we had probably played it for 5 or 6 sessions. And finally, I had a conversation with the party, and they were like, "Well, we like this, but we want to know where it's going to go." And so I was like, "All right." So I just threw in the very last portion of the game so that they could get the culmination of the adventure. But throughout the game, my wife's character, she was a runaway, and she was playing a Wilder, a psionic class, and her dad in her backstory was a scion. and he was trying to formally train her, and she was rebellious, and she ran off, and she matured her skills as a wilder, and the last battle, or the second to last battle, she was confronted with her father being the bad guy, and this very short, very dramatic battle ensued where he dies, and I can remember sitting in my car, and this is the first game my wife has ever played, and she's crying in her passenger seat because it was such an emotionally connected game. Just that little bit, and it's really cool how in such a short, I mean, that was probably 2 sessions. In such a short time, you can swing a game from being somewhat monotonous, exactly, to something that is just memorable for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's there are 2 things that you could work off of. One is if you have an NPC or a secondary character that your player character has and interacts throughout many different storylines, or you know your player and what pushes their buttons.
Mm-hmm. Well, part of that, the important thing there is to know your players, to understand your players, and I think that that's a technique that most DMs lack. They need to be able to listen to their players and respond to them. There are many different kinds of players. We identified 3 of them in the XDM book, and I'm about to come up actually with 3 more. We're going to talk about at this convention when we do our XDM seminar here today, or here during the weekend. We got a lot going on this weekend. You were talking about confronting father, and that's very much, for example, at the heart of my Wayne of Gotham book, my Batman novel. We've always seen Thomas Wayne. This was at least the core for me of the book. We've always seen Thomas Wayne as this guy carved in marble, and the only thing we really know about him is that he died in this alley. But to confront the reality of one's father, and the mortality of one's father, and that one's father had feet of clay, is part of this journey, and that's part of all of us, which is why we had it in the book. We have here with us the lovely Laura.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, Laura. Hello.
And this is my daughter, Tasha Joan.
Hi, Tasha.
Hello.
Tasha's here. We're doing a Pick-a-Path musical on Saturday evening.
Be interesting.
Yes. Very, very exciting. She's written a whole raft of music for this musical. We have 16 songs prepared for the musical, but we'll only sing about 7 at the most because it's Pick-a-Path, right? You can't. So she's done, but we produced an album. So if you want to hear all the songs, you'll be able to find that on iTunes, actually.
Sweet.
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Can you peek ahead at the page, see if you're dead, and then go back?
As long as you don't move your finger.
I checked. I'm good. This year it says I'm still here.
So is that an event that we can all check out while we're here, or is it sold out? Or?
It is sold out. It's our first year we're doing it, and I hope it works. We do have our killer breakfast that we're doing this year, which
I think half of us are going to.
Please do. Please come.
We've come
to
all of us have gone at least, those who've been here multiple years have gone at least once. So.
of course, and visit us at the booth, of course, and vote for me this fall.
Voting for?
Well, the T-shirts that we have this year, come and see the T-shirt, and if you can get one, good luck. But the T-shirt is my campaign T-shirt, our campaign T-shirt, and it says "Vote Hickman" on the front, the balanced party, and then in parentheses underneath it says 3 fighters, a cleric, a magic user, and yeah.
That's awesome.
I just write you in this year at the election.
Please do.
Because
Please do, yes. And the back of the shirt is probably, I think, our campaign slogan, Vote Hickman, because they know fantasy when they see it. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to have to run.
Thank you, Tracy.
Tracy, thanks a lot for joining
Thank
us.
you. And if you ever need to find me again, I'm Skypeable.
All right.
Awesome.
Excellent, thanks.
beautiful.
Well, that was awesome. So as we wrap up here for the Established Facts at the last show, we established that when getting prepared for Gen Con, there are a couple things that you need. You need dice, pencils, you need your gaming books, but most of all, you need 2 werewolf decks.
Dex. D-E-C-K-S. Dex.
That's what I said.
Yeah, I know, but Mikey Mason might be listening.
He doesn't listen to art.
And,
He said he
and
did.
I guess I had a whole elaborate established fact that I had generated over the course of the show, but in the last 5 seconds of the show, it has been changed. And so we're just going to leave you with the established facts of the Tracy Hickman show of the established facts. Vote Hickman.
Vote Hickman.
All right. Have a good Gen Con.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Established Facts. Please visit us at theestablishedfacts.blogspot.com. Also, visit us at our Facebook page, facebook.com/theestablishedfacts. To show us your support and buy some merchandise, go to cafepress.com/castingrobot.